Today I'm going to be reading you a few chapters from this book. My book. It's called A Zoologist's Stumblings in Africa, How to Habituate a Bonobo. And it's about my time living in the Congo in a small research camp, following these great apes around on a daily basis. The chapters I'm going to read to you today, I'm going to go from the start, basically about my journey to camp, right up to the bonobos. So this is available on Amazon. It's available as a paperback and as a Kindle edition. If you enjoy my little bit of a reading today, please let me know and send a comment below. And if you decide to pick up the book, that would be great. And please, again, let me know in the comments. Let me know what you thought of it. And with that, I'm going to go straight into it with Chapter 1. What exactly is a bonobo? 3 job offers. Qatar with good pay, Mauritius in charge of a small offshore island, or Congo, living in a tent cut off from the outside world. I went for Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo, or DRC to be exact. The main reason being it was on the continent which I cannot get out of my mind, Africa. Okay, Mauritius is considered Africa, but it's not the mainland. In the footsteps of another crazy Welshman, H.M. Stanley, and the Scot, Dr. Livingstone, I would be heading into the forest of Conrad's Heart of Darkness. But why? To habituate bonobos, of course. If you have a blank expression on your face right now, don't worry. Most people have the same reaction. And what exactly is a bonobo? Is a question I am frequently asked. Well, it's Africa's third great ape, and alongside chimpanzees is our closest relative. Somewhere in our evolution, we all shared a common ancestor with chimps and bonobos. The bonobo and chimpanzee share the same genus, Pan. Some people describe a bonobo as a pygmy chimpanzee, which I can tell you it is not. In fact, early specimens of bonobo were not distinguished as a separate species from chimps. You can even see in some old zoo photos chimps and bonobos in the same enclosure labelled as chimpanzees. In 1928, a scientist named Schwartz was measuring skulls of what was thought to be a juvenile chimp, but turned out to be an adult bonobo. This is when it was named the pygmy chimpanzee, until an official name change in 1954 to bonobo, thought to be after a village in the Congo named Bonobo, where a shipping crate with bonobos in was sent from the 1920s. Heinz Heck, the man who later officially named the species, used the name bonobo back in 1939 in a paper, but it was not officially adopted at that point. What splits the chimps and bonobos in the wild is the mighty Congo River. Chimps and gorillas are found only to the north, while bonobos are found only to the south. The bonobo is also only found in the DRC, where the chimp is pretty widespread in tropical Africa north of the Congo River. After starting work with the bonobos, it soon became clear they are not just pygmy chimps. They look and behave so different, it's hard to know why early scientists did not pick up on the differences earlier. The bonobo is quite slender, though still very muscular, is a little shorter than a chimp maybe, but not much so that it's a discernible characteristic to me. Bonobos also have a much more gentle face and a parting in the hair on their head. The bonobos are born with black faces, which don't change colour, but chimp babies have a tawny colour that darkens with age. The vocalizations are different too, but more on that later. Let's get to the Congo. I would be working for the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology under Gottfried Hohmann, one of the leading scientists on wild bonobos. My role was to habituate, or in common terms, follow the bonobos until they ignore you, so they act natural around humans and studies can then be conducted without affecting the apes. The bonobo community I was to work with lived in a remote part of the Congo rainforest, on the borders of Salonga National Park, where a remote and basic research camp named Louis Catal had been set up with the help of local village about 10 years previously. So I got my inoculations up to date, sorted a visa and hopped onto a plane to the Democratic Republic of Congo. a country with more name changes than the birds of South Africa. Formerly, Congo Free State, Belgian Congo, Republic of Congo, Zaire, and now the Democratic Republic of Congo, locally Republique Democratique du Congo, are known as the DRC, DR Congo, Congo Kinshasa, Congo, or RDC. Goodbye, civilization. As part of my job, all flights had been arranged, as well as having someone to meet me at the airport. When I arrived in Kinshasa's International Njili Airport, Papa Jean-Paul, my steward, was standing at immigration waiting for me in an official uniform. I was glad of his presence, as it was so smooth going through immigration and customs. He obviously was an important member of staff at the airport, since people cleared a way for him. As we reached customs, he was busy in conversation with someone he knew, when I was pulled aside by the customs official, who started to open my bag to do a search. I wasn't too bothered, as I knew there was nothing in there to cause problems, except maybe 9 months worth of tea and 200 surgical masks, but I had heard customs could create problems. I was relieved when Papa Jean-Paul saw what was happening and came straight over. As soon as the customs official saw I was with Papa Jean-Paul, he hurriedly closed my bag and waved me to the exit to meet Sergei, my driver. Then followed one of the most frantic drives of my life. Kinshasa's streets are not in the best condition. While people in London think they need a big 4x4, people in Kinshasa know they need one. There are potholes to rival the Kimberley Diamond Mine. The main road into the city actually disappeared and consisted of a large expanse of mud with vehicles going in all directions to get through. On the paved roads, people just drove everywhere. I'm still not sure which side of the road people drive on out there. The streets are lined with tiny huts selling everything you could need, from carpets to food, spare tyres and chickens. Children ran alongside stopped traffic selling soft drinks, while people walked goats down the road. At one point, I noticed a crowd of people dancing down the main road, and saw they were carrying, while throwing up and down, a coffin. We eventually reached my accommodation, and I was surprised at the quality of the place. A living room with aircon, a bathroom with running, although cold, water, and a kitchen. Since I had an extremely small knowledge of French from my GCSEs, and Papa Jean-Paul had limited English, we had a long discussion about something. Eventually, we managed to converse that I was to rest and would be picked up next morning at 8 AM to meet some people. I showered off the pollution of the city and collapsed under my mozzie net. 8 AM came, so did 9 AM. At 10:30 AM, I was collected by Sergei, the driver. I thought another trip through the city was coming, so I braced myself for the daredevil driving. But Sergei just drove across the road to the project office. I sat here for 2 hours in the still and humid air doing absolutely nothing. Eventually, I was given passports for people in camp with their visa extensions, and told to go rest and not leave the compound in which I was staying on my own. I spent the day resting and exploring the compound, not daring to venture beyond the barbed wire topped walls. The place I was staying at was a physiotherapy centre, which also rents rooms out, but mostly to patients. I needed to pay for my stay, so took a wander around. There were lizards everywhere, ranging from large blue and red agama to tiny geckos and girdled lizards. I wandered around trying to find where to pay, passing a family of chickens scavenging in a muddy rubbish pile. I went to what I guessed was a reception room, and asked the lady behind the desk, "Parlez anglais?" only to get the response, "No." The lady who answered me left the room, and by hand gestures it was clear I was to follow. We walked through a series of low buildings and courtyards. With all the people here limping in casts due to physiotherapy, it felt strangely like MASH. She led me into a small room and said, "The doctor who speaks English," before leaving the room. I guessed all of English was used in that one sentence. I sat in the small humid room, wondering what was going on, when the doctor came in and started asking me what my symptoms were. He looked confused when I told him I needed to pay for my room. I showed him my receipt, and he ushered the lady back into the room. She took me to another room where some people started talking to French in me. I just stared back at them with a blank expression on my face. The man then had an idea. He wrote down the price in dollars that I was to pay. I handed the money over and went to eat my last steak for 9 months. Tomorrow morning I would finally leave the concrete jungle and head for the real thing. Next morning, I was surprised when Sergey arrived early. I had just finished my last phone call for 9 months to my mother, and I was halfway through a cup of soup when he knocked on the door. While Sergey waited for me to finish my soup, he switched on the TV, which had no signal. He decided to keep watching the static anyway, rather than attempt another impossible conversation with me. Soup down, I said goodbye to mains electricity and running water, and hopped back into the Land Rover with Sergey to tackle Kinshasa's roads. We survived the drive and ended up at the private airfield to catch a small plane into the interior. I had to check in first, which was just an office with a huge set of ancient scales. I was weighed and made a note of the number to compare my weight when I left. My bags were then weighed and checked for illegal items. As I had some items to take into the field from the institute, I had some odd things in my bag. A few duct tape wrapped parcels of soap and a bag full of surgical masks. I managed to mime having a wash to explain the soap parcels, but the masks provided a bit more of a problem. Since I was still on a visitor's visa, I was not meant to be working. My passport would return to Kinshasa to be upgraded to a work permit, but it had to be sent back out on the flight I got, as my passport was needed to be on the flight with me to the jungle, and then the process could take months. I remembered there were 2 vets at a temporary project in the village, so I said, "Pour veterinarian?" I don't know if the customs official understood or just had enough trying to work out what I was going on about, but he closed my bags up and sent them to the plane. Sergey then weighed the boxes of corned beef, sardines, milk, liquid nitrogen, and other essential supplies. We hit the maximum weight, so just stopped loading the rest of the supplies, and they had to come on the next flight. I saw a rucksack in Sergey's Land Rover. Since it wasn't loaded, I guessed it was his bag. It later turned out to be Robin's lost luggage. She had been in camp for 2 months, and her luggage had been delayed, so had not made it to camp with her. She had been waiting on the bag. I didn't know this, and if I had, I would have tried to probably, and failed, due to the language barrier, to exchange the corned beef and sardines for her bag. All my belongings were loaded onto the plane, while I went to security in another building. All I had was my flight details, passport, and letter of invitation from the village confirming what I was doing. Then we hit a snag. I wasn't allowed through security. I had no idea what was going on. I handed all my paperwork in and had a passport with a 3-month visa in, and nothing in my pockets to cause alarm. Sergey was trying to negotiate with the airport staff, while I sat in a small, stuffy, humid security room. Eventually, Sergey came and tried to explain what was going on. All I understood was $10. He was asking for a bribe. I tried to explain my money was on the plane, but he was once again having trouble understanding my awful use of French. Eventually, he phoned someone who spoke English. It turned out everyone who used the airport had to pay a $10 departure fee. I was unaware of this, so hadn't got $10 out of my bag. I explained this, which was then explained to Serge, who came up with a plan. I was taken through security and driven to the plane to collect my money. I could have left them, but didn't want to risk it, so I grabbed my money, returned to security. Finally getting through security, I was once again driven to the plane. I thanked Sergey for all his help before getting in the car. As I climbed into the car, there was someone who spoke English. I had seen him in security when we had all the problems in communication. Why hadn't he just translated and sped things up? Anyway, didn't matter. I boarded the plane, sent my final text message for 9 months to let my mother know that I was safely on the plane and prepared for takeoff. The pilot checked the exterior of the tiny 2-seater Cessna before climbing in. I was surprised to find he was a jolly American missionary. I found it ironic the camp was mainly studying evolution, and here we were using the missionary air force to get there. We taxied and hurtled down the runway, feeling like the plane was about to disintegrate, before soaring over Kinshasa and headed to the interior. As I've mentioned, I was working for Max Planck Institute of Evolutionary Anthropology under Gottfried Hohmann as a habituator of a second group of bonobos at Louis Catal field site. Louis Catal itself sits within the forest belonging to the village of Lumpole, on the western edge of the Salonga National Park. Each village seems to own a huge tract of rainforest, which they mainly use for hunting. Since Gottfried had connections with a friend of the village of Lumpole, they agreed to rent out part of their forest south of the Lukoro River and cease hunting. It was a perfect arrangement for everyone. Lumpole's villagers all had a constant income, Max Planck had its study site, and the national park had a new buffer zone. In addition, the next village over from Nampole, called Ipope, had an airstrip, which they rented out to us. That is where I was flying towards now, over Africa's green heart. Welcome to the jungle. The concrete jungle gave way to open fields, which slowly turned to forests. After about an hour and a half, we had to touch down at the halfway point to refuel in a mission town at the edge of the main rainforest. We were flying such a small plane that the fuel tanks was too small to make the long journey in one hop. A small group of children gathered around, taking great interest in us as the plane was refueled. In my pocket, I had a bar of chocolate. As I pulled it out of my pocket, their eyes widened. I decided they would probably appreciate more than me, so I handed it to them. They ran off laughing and smiling, happy despite the fact that it had melted my pocket and now was a liquid mess. From here on, the rainforest completely took over. The trees from above looking like tiny stalks of broccoli spread to the horizon in all directions, with a few savannas interspersed here and there. I felt like Finch Hatton soaring up high in the little plane, all the while hoping he didn't suffer the same fate. Finally, after 4 hours of flying, out in the distance the small airfield of Ipope appeared. I say airfield, it was just a small strip of dirt at the edge of one of the savannas, which is cleared by hand every now and then of grass and rocks. After a bumpy touchdown, a small army of porters and children had gathered in the hope of being able to carry some supplies for a small fee. I briefly met Charlotte, whom I was replacing, before she got on the plane, taking my passport with her back to Kinshasa to get the visa extension. At the airstrip there was also Catherine, my field partner for the next 4.5 months. Catherine was a Canadian with more energy than anyone should be able to contain. She would follow the bonobos for hours on end and show no signs of fatigue, while I'd be trailing behind exhausted and sweating profusely. She was also one of the nicest people I have ever met and happy to lend a hand. The camp manager, who will stay unnamed for reasons you'll later find out, will be referred to as Kurt from here on in. He was not so nice. Mara, who was our local representative in the village, was also at the airstrip to meet me. There was a lot of noise and arm waving as Kurt and Mara dealt out items to be carried. Catherine and I left them to it and had a short walk to the village of Ipope to get some water and an orange before a 5k hike to Limpole village. Catherine had the duty of making sure the porters didn't drop the liquid nitrogen which had come on the plane, so she hurried on ahead of the porters. She left me with 3 children who showed me the way to the village. It was the first time I had experienced the rainforest and it was amazing. My senses were overloaded by the smells, sights and sounds. I hardly noticed the humidity and heat. There were butterflies of so many shapes and colours. Birds were calling all around and tropical fruit lay at the side of the path. The 3 kids tried to teach me a little French, but after a while they got bored. I kicked one of the small fruits I saw lying around. One of the kids kicked it back, and we ended up having a game of football as we walked to the village. Catherine had managed to get the liquid nitrogen to the village safely, so she came to find me. She joined the game as we finished the walk to the village. At the village, there were just tents set up on Mara's lawn. The lawn was just a patch of bare grass in front of his house. I removed my boots and slipped on some more comfortable flip-flops before relaxing for a while. Mara's wife had prepared us a lunch of chicken, greens, squash and chikwanga. Chikwanga, also known as kwanga, is a strange starchy dough that is the basis of any Congolese meal. It's made from manioc roots and stored in banana leaves. It's the marmite of the Congo. Some people love it, and some hate it. Personally, my stomach couldn't handle it and would give me stomach cramps if I ate it. Also tasted awful, like sour milk, only worse. I never got used to it, and the only time I could eat it was a surprising food item. Chocolate spread. If any chocolate spread came in a care package, I would spread it on the kwanga and not care about the stomach pain. Anyway, back to the meal. It was a very nice introduction to Congolese cuisine. Halfway through, an extra bowl came out. I took a look and saw more meat. I wondered if it was one of the small goats I had seen wandering around the village. Catherine asked Mara what it was. Singe rouge, he replied. Knew what that was. The bowl contained red colobus monkey. I kindly refused, and even though I like different types of meat, primate is one on the list of my things not to eat. After the meal, Catherine suggested we both take a walk around the village. The 2 of us were instantly joined by hundreds of children and the Dilo. Danilo was like a child, but actually in his 20s. He was also a semi-deaf mute, only able to make basic sounds. The village is what you expect of an African village from Stanley Livingstone's time, except with the addition of one small solar panel. The only source of electricity was Mara's solar panel, which the village used to charge batteries for head torches and nothing else. It was a small, dusty place with tiny goats and scrawny chickens. Kids with grubby hands and huge smiles politely demanded we take photos of them. Turicles flew through the trees, and hunters walked about with dead monkeys and porcupines over their shoulders. It was a peaceful village, with everyone waving and saying Mbote, the Lingala, for hello. Occasionally, the odd Mbote Mundele, the Lingala for white man, was called, but was without any hate. Danilo kindly showed us the village and his house, which he was very proud of. I met a few of the villagers who work in camp, but were not on rotation at the moment. They come to camp for a fortnight's rotation working as cooks, fishermen and bonobo workers. A group of teenagers were peeling peanuts and kindly gave us some to eat. What was strange was one had a modern mobile phone and it was working, albeit without a signal. Where he had got it was a mystery, but he must have persuaded Mara to charge it for him. After the excitement of the village, we returned to our tents by Mara's hut for a rest. Later in the afternoon, a lot of commotion was coming from the school. Mara came over to us to take us to the school to see what was going on. As we entered the school, the floor was covered in blood, and we saw Modizu, the village chief, on the floor. He was covered in blood himself, with a machete in his hands, and Danilo, also covered in blood, had a lump of flesh in his hands and was standing above him. What was going on? Had there been a violent argument with Danilo attacking the chief? Mara pushed his way through the crowd with us to confront the scene. As we edged closer, through the crowd, we saw Modizo was actually carving up a carcass. As we got to the front, we saw it was a red river hog, and Danilo was dividing up the meat between the villagers. A hunter had caught the pig earlier on, and was the tradition of the village. When a large animal is caught, it is divided by the chief, since red meat is hard to come by. Danilo saw us and waved us over. He was very proud of the kill, even though it wasn't him who killed it. He wanted lots of photos to be taken of him holding the pig's head. I'd hoped to see a red river hog during my time here. I just hoped it would have been alive. Well, I still had 9 months. We left the school and went for our bucket showers. While waiting for supper, we watched people who were coming back into the village after work in the fields or out hunting in the forest. 2 hunters came in, one with a porcupine and another with a genet. When supper was ready, we were treated with a piece of the red river hog each. I enjoyed the meal, which tasted like beef, rather than pork, but was very stringy. Catherine enjoyed it more, since meat is even rarer to come by in camp. After a good meal, we hit the hay, ready for an early start in the morning. I drifted off listening to the deafening chorus of insects and drums coming from the village, celebrating the killing of the hog. Louis Catal. 5 a.m. came and I woke refreshed, ready for a 25-kilometre hike into camp. Today I needed to stay with Catherine, since she knew the way and the porters would set out later in the day once the baggage had been distributed. The liquid nitrogen carriers had already been assigned, and once again Catherine had to keep an eye on them. This meant I had to walk at Catherine's speed. Catherine walks at an incredible pace, which I would soon adopt as well, and we made the walk in record time. After a bit of walking through the open savannah, our small caravan hit the first big savannah. By the time we reached this, it was already blazingly hot, but the giant termite mounds made up for this. They were huge, some at least 3 times my height. The ones I was used to in South Africa were considered big if they were waist high. Hard to believe these huge towers were created by tiny termites, no bigger than a fingernail. I was thankful when after 30 minutes we hit the forest on the other side. I was getting tired and we still had more forest and another large savannah and a river to cross. After the last savannah, we hit a small fishing camp called Iyaka. In a few months, this would become a campsite for 2 French biomonitors. It would also provide a wonderful place to take a holiday in a few months and was a birder's paradise. At the moment, it was just an open bit of ground on the edge of the savannah with a single wooden hut and the remains of a fire. By now, I'd run out of water, so I was glad when we hit the river an hour and a half later, after crossing some swamp, which meant only 20 minutes more walking from the far shore. The nitrogen carriers rowed us downstream in a dugout canoe called a pirogue, while Danilo, who had caught up with us in the second savannah. It was incredibly peaceful being rowed downriver, and we eventually turned into a small side stream. It felt as if we were really deep in the jungle now, which we were. In the water, we saw the only leech anyone's ever seen in Liricatal. I saw no more during my stay, which I was happy about as there were already enough nasties to deal with. It was then a short walk to camp, which I was glad to reach, since I developed large blisters on both my heels. Walking through the forest, you came across a small clearing which houses the camp. I was extremely thirsty, having finished my water a way back, so the first thing I did was take a drink, which immediately caused me to vomit. Since my luggage had not come in yet, Catherine gave me a tour of camp. Most people were in the field, but I met the local cook and a few of the Western researchers. The camp consists of a few wooden huts, each housing the kitchen, food depot, storage depot, tents, and the eating hut. These buildings need to be replaced almost on a yearly basis due to termites and the wet conditions. They were made of small trees from the forest, lianas to hold them together, and palm fronds as the roof. They were very waterproof, but did need patching regularly. Around the edges of camp, there are a few pineapple plants growing, providing juicy fruit from time to time. At the very edge of the clearing, the forest with its tall trees blocked any view. In the centre of camp sat the two solar panels, which needed to be rotated through the day so they were always facing the sun. This provided enough power for charging the computers and headlight batteries. Rising tall above camp is a giant metal pole. On top of this sits an antenna, which provided our only contact to the outside world. Through this, camp could receive emails via radio signals, but only when there was excess power collected by the panels. Around the very edge of camp, there are multiple paths in the forest. One to the showers and toilets, one to the lab, one to the village, and two to the bonobos. The showers are just roofless cubicles with three sides lined with palm fronds. The open side faces into the forest. Water comes from a small spring 5 minutes walk away, of which we're rationed to a half bucket a day to prevent it drying out. Toilets are a hole in the ground with logs over so you don't fall in. Down the two bonobo paths are the two communities of bonobos currently being followed, east side and west side. When I arrived, all data was collected on west side, who had been followed for about 10 years. I was to work on east side habituating the second group and collecting what data I could. When I arrived, there had been just about 2 years of habituation. This meant the bonobos could be followed, but were still wary. During my time, their tolerance increased greatly, even to the point that more data collection could be carried out on a regular basis. I wouldn't see the bonobos straight away, as I needed to learn the forest and stay in quarantine to avoid transmitting any outside illnesses I may have brought in with me. Since the bonobos are so closely related to us, they can catch pretty much all the illnesses brought into the forest with us. But since they don't have any immunity to the foreign illnesses, something as simple as the common cold can be catastrophic. Even once cleared to go into the forest, we always wore surgical masks and kept 7 meters from the group. Since there are two communities, there are also two sets of researchers, one team for East and one for West. Since habituation was still ongoing and no real data was collected, it was just Catherine and I who worked on the East side, and later Leanne and I, while everyone else was collecting data on the fully habituated, and to me less interesting, West side. Since it was just the two of us, we were always out with the bonobos every shift we had, whereas West side had to work on a rota system. This meant that I got to have a more personal experience, feeling privileged to be one of the few people who got to know these special apes. Once my luggage had arrived, I set up my new home for the next 9 months, and I was lucky in selecting my location, as I now managed the largest tent area, which Charlotte had just left. The way it had been built meant it was double the size of the other tent areas, but could only house one tent due to it backing onto the depot. This meant while I had plenty of room to place my equipment and eventually build a patio, I did have a noisy area, as I would later find out. When people leave early morning, they have to get items from the depot, and as my head lay against the depot, it would often wake me up at 3 AM on my days off. The rest of my first day was spent peeling peanuts while talking to one of the few researchers in camp. I learnt from Martin, the original habituator of the West Side, and now a postdoc, about what wildlife I would expect to see. Since I love birding and Martin was a keen birder, I mostly learned what avian wonders I might encounter during my time there. Before leaving, I'd read Ivory, Apes and Peacocks by Alan Root, in which he describes his quest to film the Congo peacock in the wild. I had seen my bird book that the position in the Congo was at the edge of the peacock's range, so even though the tales had intrigued me, I didn't hold out much hope of seeing one. However, when Martin told me that everyone in camp had seen at least one, I became overjoyed. It would take me a few months, though, to actually see one, but I did often hear them calling out during my morning walks in the forest. As night fell quickly, 30 minutes from light to dark, due to being just under the equator, people started to come back from the forest. When I arrived, there were 8 people in camp and everyone was friendly and laid back. I felt at home right away. To mark my arrival, Catherine had baked banana bread, which I thought may have been the norm, but soon found out it was a great treat. I crawled into my tent, exhausted that night, but so happy and excited about venturing into the forest to learn the trails and forest skills. Who knew I would also encounter my new forest family of bonobos tomorrow? Next chapter, it's called Call of the Bonobo, and I will leave you there. If you want to find out what happens in the rest of the book, like I say, it is on Amazon as paperback, as you can see in my hands, and also as an e-book, Kindle book, and throughout I have illustrated the book. But yeah, if you enjoyed my reading and you'd like to hear more, please let me know below down in the comments. And if you do decide to pick it up on Amazon, please let me know in the comments below. Yeah, any other suggestions, any comments on what you think about the book, please let me know. And remember to subscribe to see more content from the Congo soon.